Now, are you two related?
Not that I know of. He's much better looking than I am.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, thank you very much. A very interesting set of reports, and we appreciate you coming before us and talking.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, members, we're going to take a lunch break, but I just thought I noted that Mr. Helliker was here. Oh, there he is, in back. I thought I saw you, Paul. And we've got other items on the agenda. My suggestion was going to be to see whether we could ask either Dr. Collins or Mr. Helliker to start the presentation, and we could probably get through that in relatively rapid order. That would save a little time. Then we'll take a break and come back for the other business. Gentlemen, would you like to arm wrestle or otherwise yell at each other? Look at each other and decide. Do you want to be, Dr. Collins, do you want to be part of the science plan presentation as well? Because that'll come in the afternoon. If that's okay. Mr. Helliker, would you be prepared to go now? Yes, sir. Okay. Members, if you would take a look, please, at file item number 9, which we were going to do right after the break, but it's a briefing on the drought in the Delta by Mr. Helliker, who, as you know, is the Deputy Director at the Department of Water Resources, and he came early, and we appreciate that, and I'm glad we can take this time. Mr. Helliker.
Oh. Yeah, I'll go very quickly. Can I say just a quick word or two just in way of introduction, yes. And then I will turn it over to Deputy Director Helliker. I just wanted to point out that this is an item that staff have been keenly watching, given the exceptionally dry winter and dry water year type that we find ourselves in. I wanted to mention that this is, at least staff's vision, will be the kickoff presentation in a series that we will bring to the council either monthly or very close intervals at their council meetings. Our hope is to continue to have briefings from the Department of Water Resources, Bureau of Reclamation, other water agencies and stakeholders. Deputy Director Helliker is going to paint kind of a high-level overview picture of the conditions, of impacts, of the operations, and then our hope is as we move through a series of these types of presentations, we can drill down as we go through if there are specific items of interest to the council. Then we as staff will work to bring panels together and other speakers. So I just wanted to get that in there before I turn it over to Director Helliker.
Sure.
Try that one. Okay, thank you very much, Cindy and Mr. Chair, members of the council. I'm happy to be here today to talk with you about probably not some great news, but you all have seen what's happened with the water years so far. So let me launch into some presentations and information for you, some statistics for you that we keep, and actually we do have regular reports which we'd be happy to synthesize for you and provide to you. I don't think that much will change between now and when it starts to rain again, but we're happy to provide whatever information you'd like. So this year was unusual in both ways, being both wet and dry. The first couple of months of the water year were particularly wet. As noted here, in November and December, over 70% of the normal precipitation occurred. So we were hoping that we were going to be heading to a good year for water because it was dry last year. But that didn't turn out to be the case. It was, even though it was the 10th wettest December on record, we quickly went into a period in the beginning of this calendar year, which turned out to be the driest period in 90 years. So this unusual combination of factors has resulted in some challenges that we've had that relate to the way that water years are characterized and the requirements that we're supposed to meet as a result. And so just to give you a sense of how this year compares to previous years, you can see that we started off with a lot of precipitation, and then it leveled off on the graph there, and the line that's the current year is the one that's not complete yet. But the one right below it is the 2011-2012 total precipitation, and you can see it was below normal. And then the bottom ones down there are the 1920s and then the 1976-77 time frame, and then compared to the wetter years on top. So you can see graphically how this year has evolved. And in terms of numbers, the precipitation percentages have ranged from in the upper 80s here in Sacramento, in the 80s here in Sacramento, all the way down to the just below half of normal precipitation as of May 31st in Fresno and Bakersfield. And in Southern California, it's particularly dry. So I know our friends in CAL FIRE are worried about what the year is going to hold in store in terms of fire risk. And in terms of snowpack, these are three more graphs that show the north, the central, and the south measurements that we take, and again, comparing the years across the three different regions there. So started off with a fairly good snowpack, and then it's dwindled to little, if any. In fact, I think in March we had trouble finding much, if at all, any snow. Now, what this is translated into in terms of reservoir conditions is not necessarily as bad a picture as you'd think from the precipitation. Generally, reservoirs are below average conditions, but not dramatically below average conditions, except for San Luis Reservoir. And the primary reason for that is because this year, in addition to the change or the unusual precipitation conditions, what we also had experience with was in January and February, large numbers of delta smelt showing up at the pump stations in the South Delta. And so what that's resulted in has been reductions in the amount of water that can be moved through the delta and pumped into storage. So that is why San Luis Reservoir shows such a low storage condition right at the moment. We estimate that because of the fact that these restrictions were imposed upon us this year, that we were unable to deliver about 1 million acre-feet in water supply this year, and that's average of about 20% of the total we normally do. So it's been a difficult year for water users in California, and in a second I'll show you what the allocations are. But I just want to point out that if we had our proposed Bay Delta Conservation Plan facilities in place, we would not have had to forego those deliveries. We would have been able to capture that water and move it through the system because we would have been able to avoid the pumping restrictions in the South Delta and divert water at the north end of the Delta and be able to capture the flows that did go through the Delta. So just FYI, that's a pretty clear example of why a tunnels project would be beneficial not only to maintaining the ecosystem in the Delta, but also providing water supply reliability.
Okay. Mr. Halliger, just one question. I've always been puzzled. Why is there no reported data from Don Pedro or Exchequer?
I saw that and I thought I should probably get the answer to you, but I don't know.
I've noticed it. It's just never.
Yeah, good question.
Randy,
those are locally operated.
Isn't that
reservoirs and that data is immediately available with a phone call?
Good point. So I'm not sure why we don't display it.
Yeah.
It's not like we ignore them.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
I understand.
So, summary: statewide precipitation as of May 31st, 75% of average. Runoff 65% of average, but reservoir storage is 85% of average. The State Water Project allocation this year, we started out in November with a 30% projection. Up that in December with a projection of 40% of allocation, but then we dropped it back again in March, and that's where we currently are, is a 35% projection of deliveries for the State Water Project. And then for the Central Valley Project, I don't have a slide for that because it's a more complicated picture, but it ranges from 100% deliveries for the water rights users in the Sacramento River and refuge level 2, down to 20% for the south of Delta users for agriculture. M&I is 70% south of the Delta, but that's a relatively small amount of the total. So it's a different picture because they cover many more basins than we do, but the comparative number that we normally hear is the 20% allocation for agriculture users south of the Delta. So it's a more difficult picture for our colleagues down there. What we did in response, because of the conditions this year, and I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to sit in for all of Craig Wilson's presentation, but I know he referenced the communication we had with the State Water Resources Control Board. The 8-station Northern Sierra Index, if you look at this compared to previous years, you see a pretty dramatic difference. And so that's because of the conditions that I just cited. We were finding this situation, and then in terms of the use between Shasta and the Delta, we found that depletions, which were uses by water users in the Sacramento Valley, which because of the way that the allocations are calculated, they were able to use 100% of their entitlement. But we found that the black line on this chart, which is not complete yet, but it showed that the situation we normally face in the summertime was transpiring in the spring. And so we were having a difficult time figuring out how we were going to be able to meet the temperature standards in the fall while also meeting the flow standards and the salinity standards in the Delta now. So we had discussions with the Water Resources Control Board. We considered submitting a temporary urgency change petition. We think that's probably a better way to go about it, but because of some of the concerns they have about the legal foundation of doing so, which we're discussing with them how we can resolve that in the water quality control plan, they suggested that we pursue the option we did, which was to send a letter delineating what the issues were that we were facing and how we considered this year to be a year that was more typical of a critically dry year and therefore merited using those standards to apply to the operations in the Delta. And then, as Mr. Wilson mentioned, we did receive a response on May 29th saying that the Water Board would not exercise their enforcement authority. We appreciate that. We think that that's a reasonable solution for this year, but it's not the way we'd like to proceed in the future. So we're working with the Water Board to make it a more formal process that's consistent with the provisions of the Water Code that allow for urgency changes and all of the procedures that go with that. But that is the situation this year. It is allowing us to we hope, be successful in the fall with having enough cold water in storage. We estimate that somewhere between 115 to 185,000 acre-feet of water is an amount that we can keep in the reservoirs in Shasta and upstream so that that water will be available to provide necessary temperature requirements for salmon in the fall. I think that was pretty much it for the current status. And we are looking at what next year might hold in store. We want to be prepared in case we have another dry year. So I've been tasked by my director to organize a team at DWR to look at what the hydrology might be for next year. Even with a normal year, next year we're looking at some possible shortages from what we would normally deliver. So we haven't called this year a drought. It doesn't really formally qualify, but we are taking every measure we can to make sure that our customers know that it's a dry year, and the Save Our Water campaign we're continuing to promote and looking for ways that we can make sure that the message gets out that you can't waste water anytime, and this year in particular. So we'll be keeping in touch with you as the team starts working on actions this year and next year, and be glad to keep you apprised of that and solicit your participation as well. Maybe it's something that we could discuss in the implementation committee as soon as we get that going.
Good.
Okay. Ms. Gray, you had a question? Ms. Damrell? No. Mr. Helliker, thank you very much, and thank you for being early so we could squeeze you in before lunch.
My pleasure.
I
Glad you get some lunch.
appreciate that a great deal. Okay, members, all right.